the luckiest people who survived the impossible. Imagine being struck by lightning, twice, falling 10,000 feet from the sky, facing off with a raging bear, or being buried alive in volcanic ash. For most, these situations would be the end. But for a few lucky, or perhaps miraculously resilient individuals, it was only the beginning of a survival story that defied all odds. Phineas Gage. On September 13, 1848, something truly unbelievable happened. Phineas Gage, a 25-year-old railroad foreman in Cavendish, Vermont, was using a tamping iron to pack explosive powder into a hole when disaster struck. Distracted for a split second, the iron struck a rock, creating a spark, and the powder ignited. The 43-inch-long, 1.25-inch thick iron rod blasted upward, entering Gage's cheek, passing through his left eye, and piercing the left side of his brain. It flew out the top of his skull and landed 80 feet away, coated in blood and brain matter. Gage was thrown onto his back and convulsed briefly, but to everyone's shock, he was conscious within minutes. He spoke, walked with little help, and sat upright during a 3/4-mile ox cart ride to town. Despite losing his left eye and a portion of his brain, he was walking within 3 weeks. But those who knew him said something was off. The once calm and dependable man became aggressive and unpredictable. "He's no longer Gage," a friend said. He suffered seizures in the years that followed and died 9 years later. In 2012, researchers found he had lost 11% of his brain's white matter and 4% of his cortex, mostly in the frontal lobes, the part of the brain that shapes personality. Natalya Pasternak. In May 2015, 55-year-old Natalya Pasternak went to collect birch sap in a Siberian forest with her dog and an elderly friend. But the peaceful outing turned into a nightmare. Out of nowhere, a massive brown bear appeared. It first attacked her dog, then turned on Natalya. Her friend tried to fight it off with a stick, but fled to get help after being scratched. Left alone, Natalya endured an hour-long attack, clawed across her arms, legs, head, and even scalped. The bear, thinking she was dead, dragged her body away and buried her beneath dirt and debris for a future meal. Miraculously, when wildlife officials arrived, they shot the bear and found Natalya still breathing under the pile. She survived 5 hours of surgery and made an astounding recovery. Julianne Koepcke. On Christmas Eve, 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Koepcke was flying over the Peruvian Amazon when lightning struck her plane. It disintegrated mid-air, and Julianne, still strapped to her seat, plunged 10,000 feet into the jungle. She awoke the next day with a broken collarbone, deep gashes, and a concussion, but alive. Alone and nearly blind without her glasses, she wandered through the Amazon for 9 days, surviving on rainwater and avoiding predators. She followed a stream, walked in the water to stay safe, and eventually found an abandoned hut with gasoline. In a desperate attempt to remove maggots from her wounds, she poured it into her cuts and endured the pain. She was finally rescued by locals and reunited with her father. Tragically, her mother and other passengers survived the crash, but died waiting for help. The airline shut down 11 days later. Casey Wagner. In October 2013, 31-year-old Casey Wagner attended an off-road event in Texas when a thunderstorm hit. He sought shelter under a tree and was struck by lightning. Before he could hit the ground, a second bolt struck his boots. Electricity surged through his body, paralyzing him. Luckily, a nurse nearby ran to his aid and kept him calm until medics arrived. Amazingly, he survived both strikes with only minor injuries. Beating 1 in a million odds, twice, Casey walked away a living miracle. Candela. In March 2022, Candela was waiting for a train in Buenos Aires when she suddenly collapsed. She fell straight into the gap between 2 subway cars, her head and body wedged terrifyingly between the train and platform. Witnesses thought they had just seen a tragic death, but Candela survived. Rescued quickly, she suffered a broken rib, a skull fracture, and a perforated liver. She also lost hearing in one ear, but survived a fall that should have been fatal. Ewa Wisnierska. In 2007, German paraglider Ewa Wisnierska was training in Australia when a storm swallowed her whole. Pulled into a towering cumulonimbus cloud, she was hurled upwards at 48 miles per hour, reaching 32,000 feet, higher than Mount Everest. She was struck by hail the size of baseballs and passed out in minus 67 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. Amazingly, 45 minutes later, she regained consciousness midair and landed safely over 3 hours later, frostbitten but alive. Danny Balch. In May 1980, Danny Balch and 5 friends were camping near Mount St. Helens when the volcano erupted. They were swept up in a blast of ash, mud, and scorching heat. Danny was knocked down, burned, and buried in debris. Still, he crawled through the destruction, found his injured friend Brian Thomas, and pulled him to safety. They waited nearly 9 hours before being spotted by rescue helicopters. Danny, burned and barefoot, guided rescuers to his friend before collapsing. Helen Klaben. In 1963, 21-year-old Helen Klaben hitchhiked a ride on a small plane with Ralph Flores from Alaska to San Francisco. They crashed in a snowy forest in the Yukon at minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Helen had crushed feet and a broken arm. Ralph had fractured ribs and a broken jaw. For 49 days, they survived on 4 tins of food, melted snow, and fire made from plane fuel. Eventually, Ralph managed to spell out an SOS on a nearby frozen lake. A pilot spotted it and saved them. Though frostbitten and weak, Helen made it out alive, a survivor of one of the most remarkable wilderness ordeals ever recorded. These stories aren't just about survival. They're about the unbelievable. From brain-piercing iron rods to bear attacks, lightning strikes, plane crashes, and volcanic eruptions, these people faced the impossible and lived to tell the tale. They remind us how fragile life can be and how fierce the will to survive truly is. From Phineas Gage, who survived an iron rod blasting through his skull, to Natalya Pasternak, buried alive by a bear and found still breathing, to Julianne Koepcke, who fell 10,000 feet from a plane and walked out of the jungle 9 days later. From Casey Wagner, struck by lightning twice and lived to tell it, to Candela, who fell between a moving subway and the platform and somehow survived, to Ewa Wisnierska, who passed out inside a thundercloud at 32,000 feet and landed alive, to Danny Balch, who crawled through volcanic destruction to save a friend, and Helen Klaben, who endured 49 freezing days in the Yukon wilderness with crushed bones and no food. These aren't just survival stories. They're living proof that sometimes the impossible is possible. If these left you speechless, imagine what's coming next. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share to tell us which story you want to see in the next episode. Stay safe and stay curious. May you learn to always be resilient just like these amazing people.